Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday talk, brought to you by Room to Grow, Sandy, and Strake Nature. Before we introduce our speaker, just firstly, a big thank you to our sponsors, and thank you especially to Strake Nature. Strake Nature is the leading specialist natural history publisher in Southern Africa and is associated with the best-selling and most highly regarded field guides in the region. Strake Nature publishes full-color illustrated books across a variety of subjects, including birds, mammals, reptiles, trees, and flowers, the marine environment, geology, astronomy, general wildlife, and of course, the very popular children's nature. And then from myself, Brett, Room to Grow, we've been designing and creating outdoor living spaces in and around Cape Town since 2002, and we offer a complete suite of landscape design, construction, installation and maintenance to our retail, residential and commercial clients. And you can find out more about us on our socials. And then today is my great pleasure to introduce Romy Klusener. Romy is the Senior Conservation Manager at SANCCOB, the South African Foundation for Conservation of Coastal Birds, where she leads efforts to protect the critically endangered African penguin. With over a decade of experience in seabird rehabilitation, she began her career as a rehabilitator in 2012 and has grown into a key leader within the organization. Her work spans rescue, rehabilitation, artificial incubation and release, as well as responding to oil spills, mass abandonment events, and disease outbreaks affecting wild populations. Passionate about conservation and education, Romy is committed to bringing and driving awareness and advocacy to help and secure a future for South Africa's iconic seabirds. And the book, Birds on the Brink, Guide to Seabirds of Southern Africa, and Bird Safari Activity Book, also available in Afrikaans, will be available at a special price for all the registrants during the week of the talk, both online and in-store at the Kirstenbosch Botanical Bookshop. And as usual, we welcome questions. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session with Romy, so you can please put those in the Q&A box, not the chat box, in the Q&A box, just so I don't miss everything. And we'll get to them after the talk. So Romy, thanks very much. Looking forward to this. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Brett. All right, so let's get straight into it. I want to see. All right. Good morning, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Romy Klusener, and today I am proudly representing SANCCOB, which is a non-profit organization. Sorry, really jumping the gun there. A non-profit organization at the very front line of seabird conservation. So this talk today is about the urgency, hope, and action, and about how we are trying to save the African penguin. Out of 18 penguin species in the world, the African penguin is the first penguin to be uplisted to critically endangered. The African penguin is not only a key indicator of ocean health, its decline is telling us a much bigger story about ecosystems under pressure, the role us as humans play, which is both the problem and the solution. So SANCCOB began in 1968, and this was following one of South Africa's first major oil spills. The MV Essen, which was a tanker, ran aground on Cape Point, and about 4,092 tons of crude oil spilled. And this resulted in around 3,000 oiled African penguins and about 500 oiled Cape gannets. And they also left a severely impacted coastline. And at this time, there was no organization that was equipped to care for seabirds on such a large scale. However, Althea Westphal decided to act, and she actually began washing and caring for oiled penguins at her home, using her bathroom, makeshift pools, and whatever resources she could find. So what started as a home-based rescue effort soon grew into something much bigger. Later the same year, SANCCOB was formally established with the support of scientists who helped show that unfortunately African penguin numbers were already in decline. Over time, SANCCOB became South Africa's primary responder to seabird oil spills and played critical roles in major disasters like the Apollo C and the MV Treasure oil spill. Today, we have expanded from not only being a disaster response organization, but into a leader in seabird conservation. And what I'll be talking about today is our 5 programs, which summarizes everything that SANCCOB is doing. So if you look at SANCCOB today, we operate out of 2 facilities. We have our one facility, which is based in Tableview in the Western Cape, and our second facility is in Klusener, which is in the Eastern Cape. These facilities are caring for seabirds which are rescued by either our seabird rangers, which are based at the penguin colonies in both the Western and Eastern Cape, by either the conservation partners who manage the penguin colonies, by concerned members of the public, as well as our first responder and driver network. So as mentioned, SANCCOB has rangers that are based in the colonies, and we have 11 rangers that are based across 5 of the African penguin colonies. This is Dustin Island, Robben Island, Simonstown, Stony Point, and then Bird Island in Algoa Bay. So the seabird rangers identify, rescue, and stabilize seabirds before they are transported through to our facilities. Right, so in 2004, the African penguin was declared or classified as an endangered species, and that was when there were about 52,000 breeding pairs left in the wild. Sadly, if you look at the trend shown here, it's not very good. And we have been in a very slow, and well, not a slow, we have been in a decline ever since. In 2024, the African penguin was uplisted to critically endangered by the IUCN. And if there are no drastic changes, the African penguin will become functionally extinct in our lifetimes. So functionally extinct means that a species can still exist. However, the population is so small, or the genetic pool is so weakened, that it can no longer play a meaningful role in its ecosystem or sustain itself in the wild. So these birds, since 2024, were given 10 years before this extinction becomes reality. So if you have a look at it, there are less than 3,170 days left until the 1st of January, 2035. This is a very sad reality if we cannot change the future for the African penguin. So let's just take a quick look into some of the threats that are facing African penguins. These are not all of the threats, but these are the main threats that SANCCOB has identified and is working with the managing authorities and other organizations to try and mitigate. What also needs to be understood is that these threats don't happen in isolation and often are multiple and overlapping, which makes it incredibly challenging for these African penguins. So if we look at the first and the most concerning threat, it's food availability. And this is due to shifting fish distributions and obviously the big concern with the competition with commercial purseine, anchovy, and sardine fisheries. We then have oil and pollution, and this is exacerbated by the increased shipping activity, which has been highlighted even more now with the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. We're getting a much larger portion of vessel traffic coming around the coastline of South Africa. Then we have extreme weather events. These are things such as heat stress, as well as flooding, and these are impacting mostly nest contents of breeding African penguins, such as eggs and chicks. When we look at heat stress, often if the parents just cannot cope with the temperatures, they will abandon their eggs or their chicks to go and to cool off, and then exposing these eggs and these chicks either to the hot weather, or unfortunately, kelp gull could come and predate on those eggs or chicks. And the same goes if there is extreme flooding and they are not in suitable nests. These nests will end up flooding, where eggs are then being exposed to icy cold temperatures, and chicks may suffer from severe hypothermia. Another one of the threats that these poor birds are facing is predation. And what we need to remember that because there are 2 mainland colonies, it's not just marine predation that is affecting them, but it's also terrestrial. So they are facing predation in the sea with sharks as well as seals. And then on mainland, it's animals such as mongoose, it's genet, It's caracal, it's leopard, and then it's the domestic dogs and cats as well that are a threat to them. Disease is also another big implication and threat for these seabirds, and I'm sure we have all heard of highly pathogenic avian influenza. This current outbreak started last year, July 2025, and we just haven't seen a break in this disease that has cropped up. It's affecting most badly the heart-lipped skulls as well as tern species, but there have been positive cases of African penguins. So this is a great concern to SANCCOB and to managing authorities to make sure that these birds are not severely impacted by this disease. Other notable threats that we could mention, which links into the threats that I've just mentioned, is obviously habitat loss. So that's affecting their nesting types. The guano scraping that happened many years back has stopped the birds from being able to dig into these layers of guano, and so either are nesting in very sandy burrows which can collapse, or they are surface nesting. We have, unfortunately, disturbance or human-wildlife conflict. This could be just irresponsible tourists getting too close to the animals. It includes entanglement, fishing line that's disposed of incorrectly or badly. And unfortunately, we do get birds that have been hit by cars at both our mainland colonies. All right, so what is SANCCOB trying to do to save this African penguin? So I'm going to start off quite big and just briefly discuss that the start of 2026 marked the start of SANCCOB's new 5-year conservation strategy. And this SANCCOB strategy for the next 5 years will focus on delivering 5 key outcomes. And from those outcomes, we've identified programs that are going to help us with combating some of these objectives. So our first strategic objective is to bolster wild populations through rehabilitation and chick bolstering. The second is protecting seabird colonies by reducing mortality and increasing breeding success by preventing and addressing in-colony threats such as disease, predation, habitat degradation, and the impact of extreme weather events. The third is preventing and mitigating the effects of pollution on wildlife through oil spill prevention, preparedness and response. We're then supporting the Namibian government and stakeholders in the conservation of seabirds in Namibia. And it's also looking at improving ocean health, which includes increased food availability for seabirds, which is contributing to conservation benefits. Right, so as mentioned, we then start looking at some of our programs and how we are going to start combating some of the objectives. So from these objectives, we've created thematic areas which align with the desired outcomes, with the key threats identified, ensuring clear and logical connection between SANCCOB's strategic priorities and the challenges that we're wanting to address and to attempt to resolve. So the 5 theme programs are seabird survival. We have education and empowerment, emergency preparedness and response, research and science, and advocacy and policy. So seabird survival is where my heart truly lies. And as mentioned, I have been a seabird rehabilitator, and then I work very closely with artificially incubating and hand rearing seabirds. And so when we look at seabird survival, we're going to take quite a nice deep dive into what it actually takes to rescue and release African penguins. So the Seabird Conservation Program is SANCCOB's frontline conservation initiative, and this is uniting the full spectrum of wild seabird rescue, veterinary and rehabilitative care, and it's the boots on the ground conservation action. It integrates the work of 11 seabird rangers positioned at 5 key African penguin breeding colonies. It's the coordinated rescue and safe transport of seabirds in distress to SANCCOB's 2 critical care facilities. And it's the long-term population support, which is delivered through the Chick Bolstering Project, where we artificially incubate wild origin African penguin eggs, and we rescue chicks to bolster the wild population. So as you can see, to date, we have admitted over 100,000 seabirds to both of our facilities, and on a yearly basis, we're admitting around 2,000 seabirds. obviously with avian influenza, that is going to have an impact on the amount of seabirds admitted. But we are also very proud of our 81% release rate of African penguins back into the wild. So as mentioned, I'm going to take us on a little journey of what it takes to rescue and release a seabird back into the wild. So we'll start with the seabird rangers to the rescue. These are the boots on the ground, and these are our rangers, the front line for rescue in seabird colonies. They are responding they're responding and rescuing injured, ill, and oiled seabirds, as well as identifying and rescuing abandoned seabird eggs and chicks. The 11 rangers have been trained by the SANCCOB rehabilitation team, the research team, on what is important and how they need to go about their daily duties, especially when it comes to identifying and rescuing seabirds in distress. So they've been trained how to safely and calmly rescue these patients from the wild, how to identify if a bird is in distress. And I think something for us, and what we always explain to either members of the public or even to the rangers, if you can approach the bird and you can get close and almost touch it, there's something wrong and it will need to be rescued. So as you can see in some of these images, this is Yandisa, and she is our seabird ranger, and she is based on Robben Island, and she works very closely with the Robben Island Environmental Unit and does daily patrols, and part of those daily patrols is monitoring and identifying and looking out for seabirds that need to be rescued. So as mentioned, they are taught how to evaluate a scenario and how to safely and calmly rescue patients. They are also taught basic stabilization. So as you can see, the adult penguin that is in this box has got some purple bandaging around it. And we do yearly refresher and ongoing training on penguin first aid. And it's how to safely bandage open wounds as well as active bleeding. And we have had numerous cases where the rangers have done bandaging of actively bleeding wounds that have actually saved the bird's life on the transportation through to SANCCOB. What's also important is that these birds are boxed safely, depending on what is wrong with them. So if we have birds that are hypothermic, we would ask them to please put hot water bottles with the bird. As you can see, this bird has been bandaged. If there are chicks, we will provide smaller boxes also to provide a little bit of warmth. And so there's a lot of intensive training that goes into the initial rescue of these birds. And what we always try and remind the rangers, as well as anyone that's rescuing these birds, is that our rehabilitation starts during that initial rescue phase. And if that can be done to best practice, then that bird has a really good chance of getting through to the center, being admitted, and a good chance of survival. So once the patient has been stabilized and transported, it arrives at SANCCOB, where it's admitted either into our seabird hospital, or if it's a chick or African penguin eggs, it then goes to the seabird nursery. As you can see in some of these images, this is just a basic admission process that we would do. So it is quite intensive, but every bird that is admitted gets a full health inspection by our clinical veterinarian to make sure that everything is okay. So when the bird is admitted, each of our patients is issued with a SANCCOB specific number that it keeps throughout its journey at SANCCOB. And this links with the patient's profile. So just like you would have when you go to a human hospital, our seabirds each have their own individual profile and their own records. And this is where daily record keeping is maintained. We also have accurate records of weight, the fish intake, fluids, medication, and behavior is noted. And this just helps us to evaluate and make sure that the bird is progressing and is doing well in our care. When patients are admitted to SANCCOB, they'll most likely spend their first few days in our intensive care unit. Unless they are a chick, then they'll obviously go up to our nursery. Seabirds, African penguins, are very good at masking any form of injury or if they are suffering. And so it is important for us to be able to monitor them and to identify if there are any subtle behavioral changes. And from that, we are able to then act on those and to provide the correct treatment plans for these birds. All right. So as mentioned, if we have eggs or chicks, they will go up to our brand new seabird nursery, which we're really proud of. And this opened its doors last year in 2025. And already this year, we've had a bumper season where there have been over 500 African penguin eggs that have been admitted. And these are from Stony Point as well as Simonstown. And it must just be noted that these eggs are rescued from a situation where they have been abandoned due to heat stress. They're in a high-risk area where we know predation is high, and the rangers are monitoring them. And if they have identified that they are no parents, it's a high-risk area, then they'll make the choice to rescue those eggs to allow them to have that chance of survival. And just in the seabird nursery, it really is 24-hour care. So once those little eggs hatch, the chicks are fed every 6 hours, and our teams are currently working 12-hour shifts, which cover an entire 24 cycle to ensure that these birds are given the best care that they need. All right, so once a bird is admitted, then we will start the rehabilitation process. So really depending on the reason for the patient being admitted will often depend on how long the stay is at SANCCOB. So if we have a look at the pictures on your screen, you will see the first one, that's of me when I was in the seabird nursery. And I'm feeding one of our African penguin hatchlings. So in the wild, from laying to hatch, the African penguin incubation period for the eggs is 40 days. We don't have that luxury that they all come in on day one of being hatched, and we know that in 40 days they're going to hatch. They're coming in at various stages of incubation. And so we will candle those eggs to identify how old the embryo is and how much longer they will be in our incubators for. And then once they've hatched, from hatching to fledgling, to fledging back into the wild, it's about another 3 months. So we're looking at about 90 days for a healthy chick from hatching to be released. And then if you look at the other image, this is our on-site clinical veterinarian, Dr. David Roberts, and he is doing a fracture repair on an adult African penguin. So this bird would have come in with a broken leg. We are fortunate enough at SANCCOB in the Western Cape to have our own on-site sterile theatre where we can do all our surgical procedures on site, and we have our own x-ray machine as well. So this allows us to make very quick decisions and can do emergency surgery and make sure that we're providing the birds with the best care possible. Obviously, a broken leg is going to take a lot longer to heal. And because African penguins go through what we call a catastrophic molt, and that they only molt once a year, if a penguin has a broken leg and it has just recently molted, we do need to shave that whole area around the site where we need to do the procedure. That bird has to stay for us until its next molt. So we can have patients with us for quite some time before we release them back into the wild. So as mentioned, we do have a variety of reasons for birds being admitted into our facilities. And these are things such as emaciation. And emaciation, can lead to birds being predated on, and then they're coming in with being severely underweight as well as having predator wounds. So as mentioned, these threats don't happen in isolation. Sometimes these birds are coming in with multiple issues that are wrong with them. And it's really challenging for us to be able to make sure that we provide the best care for the best outcome for these birds. So emaciation, we have birds coming in with fractured limbs, severe predation, illness, and as mentioned, a lot of them will have varying rehabilitation times. And each bird that is brought in is also given an individual care plan. And so it's an incredibly intensive process, especially when you have a lot of birds in the center. Currently in the Western Cape, we have 388 seabirds in our care. All right. So this is also just another image which shows various reasons for seabirds being, African penguins being admitted. This adult African penguin that has all the plasters on his head is actually a survivor of a caracal attack. And there are very few of these penguins that do survive the caracal attacks. He was one of the fortunate ones. So he had to have a lot, or she, sorry, would have to have a lot of procedures to get all that necrotic tissue out from under the skin. Cat bites are not a very clean bite, and so there is a lot of infection that can go on. And so it's just monitoring that this bird doesn't get sick and have secondary complications from these infected wounds. Then there's just a really nice image of a pen full of fledglings. So these would have been chicks that would have hatched in our facility, and they're sitting at about 3 months old. They've lost all their fluff and are getting ready to go through the rehabilitation process to be released back into the wild. So once the patients are strong and fit enough, they'll move out of our ICU and will move into the rehabilitation pens, where we can start the process to get the penguins fit enough for release. And this takes swimming practice to ensure that they are waterproof and fit. I'm sure a lot of you know the waters here in the Cape are extremely cold. I am a Natal girl, and so I prefer the Indian Ocean. And so, yeah, the Atlantic Ocean is incredibly icy, and we need to make sure that these penguins are as waterproof as possible so that they are staying nice and warm. So we need to make sure that they are waterproof, but the swimming is also to make sure that we're keeping up with their fitness. They also need to have a good weight. So with the fledglings, when we release them, we want them to be 2.6 kilos or over, and adults and juveniles must be 2.8 kilos or over. And the way that we are monitoring that is that these birds are weighed twice a week, and that helps us to identify and to know what type of diet to put them on, if it needs to be a maintenance diet, or if we need to increase the amount of fish intake that they are consuming at SANCCOB. What's also important for us is to do health checks on these birds. So every single bird, not just the African penguins that are in our care, are checked 1 to 2 times per week. And this is to make sure that we are keeping track if they need any medication, that they are doing well within their rehabilitation process, and to move them through the systems. One of these health checks on a weekly basis is when we take bloods from the birds, and that helps us to just to see if there's any internal infection that we visually cannot see and that we can start treating. Excuse me. So once they're capable of swimming for an extended period of time, they are 100% waterproof, they weigh enough, and they have a clean bill of health, we are happy to release them back into the seabird colonies. So at SANCCOB, we aim to release African penguins on a weekly basis, and we will release into the colonies again. So either Simonstown, Stony Point, Robben Island, or on Dussin Island. And then obviously in the Eastern Cape, they have a boat trip back to Bird Island. And as mentioned, we have about an 81% release rate of all of our African penguins, which is something we are very proud of. Then since 2018, we started with the releasing African penguin fledglings at De Hoop. And this is something BirdLife South Africa, SANCCOB, and Cape Nature have been working on. And it's to reestablish the penguin colony in the De Hoop Nature Reserve. This project is led by BirdLife South Africa, and it's aimed to reestablish a self-sustaining breeding population in that area. And to date, SANCCOB has released 333 fledglings, all which have been hand-reared at SANCCOB back to this colony in De Hoop. All right, I'm going to touch on our other programs now, just so that you can see that SANCCOB encompasses more than just rehabilitation, but we've really broadened our way of looking after the African penguin. So education and empowerment. So with education, it remains one of SANCCOB's strongest tools for conservation impact. And it's through learning that understanding takes root, and through understanding that lasting change is made possible. Our education and outreach success is built on collaboration, and its partnerships with government agencies, its schools, conservation organizations, and community groups. And this is just strengthening the collective effort to protect South Africa's seabirds. We also do a lot of events and public engagements, and this is to provide important opportunities to translate our conservation science into something that's accessible, community-driven, and is easily to understand. And a really great example of this is the collaboration that we have with Cape Nature, where we have a yearly get-together called the Penguin Palooza, and we invite all the communities from the area. We invite members of the public to witness a public release of the African penguins. And it's to create awareness about the plight of these species, and really to just pass on education and to inspire the communities and members of the public to take action. So on average, both facilities engage with around 35,000 individuals. And what's also in part of education and empowerment is our skills development program. And our skills development program is essentially our skills transfer that we're passing on to the interns and volunteers, as well as the rangers. So it's the training that the team does on site. Our volunteer and intern program is critical in order for SANCCOB's daily operations to take place. And we train about 175 individuals on a yearly basis. And this is from, as mentioned, our interns or volunteers, and this can be local as well as international. It's training up new first responders, and it's giving refresher training to our current first responders. It's onboarding drivers, as well as just that continuous training that we're doing with the seabird rangers, both that are employed by SANCCOB, but also to our managing authorities, and making sure that the conservation team on the ground, the rangers, are equipped with the knowledge and skill set on how to identify and rescue these injured seabirds. Then we look at preparedness and response. So SANCCOB's preparedness and response program is a central pillar of the organization's long-standing commitment to seabird conservation. SANCCOB was first listed in the South African National Oil Spill Contingency Plan in 2019, and we are mandated by the South African government to respond to oil spills and pollution events affecting seabirds along South Africa's coastline. We are a 24-hour response organization, and so we are ready when needed. Excuse me. So since 1968, SANCCOB has attended to 78 oil spills along the coastline. So the preparedness and response program ensures readiness to respond rapidly and effectively while continually improving the systems, training, and partnerships that make responses possible. And beyond our emergency operations, SANCCOB plays a leading role in preparedness planning, training, as well as capacity building. And that's both internally at SANCCOB and, as mentioned, with our conservation partners out in the field. All right. Then we go on to research and science. Research and science underpins all SANCCOB's conservation work, and it ensures that decisions are evidence-based and effective. Data that is collected through rehabilitation, seabird ranger monitoring, and the colony work helps guide this conservation action. As mentioned, our seabird rangers who are in the colonies are monitoring and collecting data daily on breeding success, chick survival, chick conditioning. They're doing transponder work. They're also identifying threats such as starvation, disease, predation, and injury. We also get information from birds that are rescued and brought through to the center, and this provides insight into the population health and trends. It helped us to identify causes of injury and mortality, the impacts of food shortages, oil pollution, and environmental change. SANCCOB can then provide recommendations to help guide colonies, and this can be from, example, alerting the colony to an increased certain predation that event that is taking place, or if we have detected HPAI in seabirds that have come from specific colonies. We also work closely and collaborate with different scientists, universities, and our conservation partners, and so that this research can inform our rehabilitation and veterinary practices. It's an evaluation of conservation interventions and, importantly, long-term strategies to protect seabirds and African penguins. Then we have advocacy and policy change. So this picture for us is something that we are incredibly proud of. And this came about after years of unresolved disagreement between conservation and scientists. SANCCOB and BirdLife South Africa made the difficult decision to take legal action against the DFFE. And on the 19th of March 2024, BirdLife South Africa and SANCCOB, represented by the Biodiversity Law Centre, initiated this landmark litigation. So this was the first case in South Africa invoking the minister's constitutional duty to prevent the extinction of the then endangered and now critically endangered African penguin. The case followed the failure since at least around 2018 to implement biologically meaningful fishing closures around African penguin breeding colonies, despite strong scientific evidence. In March 2025, SANCCOB and BirdLife South Africa secured a historic court-ordered settlement, which resulted in a no-take zone for commercial sardine and anchovy fishing around 6 key African penguin breeding colonies. So this is 4,027 additional square kilometers of no-take fishing zones that were put around these key penguin colonies. Why this matters for African penguins. So African penguins rely on sufficient nearby sardine and anchovy stocks to feed themselves and their chicks, and the 6 fishing closures secure this biologically meaningful foraging areas along the West Coast, the Southern Cape, as well as in Algoa Bay. This improved access to food will increase adult survival, as well as chick growth and fledgling success. These protections are a critical step in bringing African penguins back from the brink of extinction. And while we celebrate this important milestone, SANCCOB and every other organization that is fighting for the African penguin knows that the work is far from finished. The survival of the African penguin depends on sustained monitoring, enforcement, cooperation with industry and government, and continuous science-led advocacy to ensure the species can recover and thrive into the future. And while rehabilitation can save individual seabirds and African penguins, it's the policy change that can protect these entire populations. I'd like to close my talk with a video which reflects the dedication, hard work, and collaboration of the SANCCOB team. And this is a team that's committed to saving the most endangered penguin species in the world. So I do hope, for everyone's sake, that it is smooth running, but just enjoy. So I will just explain what is happening. So the first, this is in our seabird nursery, and that is one of our hatchlings, which is in the neonatal incubator. This little guy is busy hatching. For anyone that's interested, it can take between 48 and 52 hours for a little African penguin chick to hatch out of his egg. A nice healthy weight for a little African penguin chick is about 69 to 70 grams. Okay, when we feed our little guys, these guys are getting fed every 3 hours. And we feed them what we call fish formula. So it is just a fish smoothie. As they get older, we will start introducing solid pieces of fish into their diet. That is a very, very confusing feeding list that we have to follow to ensure that each individual bird is given the required food for that specific bird. And with these little penguin chicks, that is due to their weight. That helps us to determine how much fish they get. As they get older, they can eat up to 4 fish at each feed, and that's whole fish, so about 8 in one day. Now we're going through the rehabilitation process. So this is just some of our fledglings swimming. Really good waterproofing. You can see they look like little rugby balls floating in the pool. So these would have been our next birds ready for release. And obviously an exciting and incredibly special day for all of us is release day. And these little fledglings, probably hatchlings at SANCCOB, are a little bit scared to be released. And it's usually the adults, yeah, they gun it through to the water. And then that encourages the youngsters to try and keep up with them. And that is it. anything from donating financially, donating your time to become a volunteer, a first responder, a driver. We're always looking for support, and that's in both the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. You can become a member of SANCCOB as well. And yeah, please just go onto our website, go onto our social media platforms, and just give us a like and a follow as well. Thank you. That's me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Romy. I'm so glad that we've finally got you on and to give us a look inside what goes on at the organization. It's unbelievable what you've built. And I know myself and everybody's very grateful that you are doing the work, or people are doing the work that that you've been doing. Thank you for sharing that with us. We do have some questions, so let's get on to that. Monique, very simply, I'm not sure what she's referring to exactly, but it says, how bad is it? But, big question to start off with.
It's bad. I always remember when I started at SANCCOB in 2012, there were 19,000 breeding pairs left in the wild. And SANCCOB, as well as a lot of other conservation authorities and organizations, we're working our socks off, and the numbers just keep dropping. So unless there's some very bold action that's going to take place, these birds are in trouble. So, it's us asking everyone to create awareness, to send letters to the minister, to be able to be vocal and to be that voice of the penguin, and get the message out that there needs to be drastic action that is taken. Without organizations like SANCCOB, they would have, be off in a far worse situation. We're concerned about food availability. If you look at oil spills, the treasure oil spill, which happened in 2000, affected 20,000 African penguins. They were oiled. Another 20,000 were rescued that were not oiled. We don't even have those numbers left in the wild. So if we had a catastrophic event like that again, it's serious. So we need to all act.
Thank you. Call to action. That's succinctly put. Yeah, let's not sugarcoat it.
No.
Elizabeth has asked here, in general, do you release the penguins back into the same colony where you collected them from? And how is the genetic diversity through the colonies?
Right. So logistically, it can be challenging to release the birds back to where they've originated. Fledglings, when they naturally, or in the wild, when they go to sea, they will then go and choose which colony they want to go to. But that's the beauty of post-release monitoring. So every bird that SANCCOB releases back into the wild, we insert a PIT tag. So just like you'd put into your cat, into your dog, and there's also transpondering that gets done in the wild. And so what that tells us, that can tell us movements between the colonies. There's ground readers in the colony. So every time a bird walks over, it picks up their unique number. We've had adults that we've released at Stony Point, and a couple of days later, they picked up at Simonstown, and that's potentially where they've been rescued. It can be, we will try, if we have a large batch of chicks that have hatched from Simonstown, to release them there. It can be challenging, and especially because we're also looking at bolstering the De Hoop colony. We do aim to release a lot of our chicks, our fledglings at De Hoop.
Okay, well, that follows nicely onto Barbara's question, which is how successful has the De Hoop new colony been, as like from a survival rate? Because I had a question linked to your hand rearing the chicks. Yes. How did they adapt to being, they don't have a mother, how do they learn to be wild?
Sure. So it's still quite early stages to determine whether De Hoop has been successful. A penguin will start breeding at about between 4 and 7 years. So we've had birds coming back to the colony. So we are picking that up on the ground reader yet. So we are picking that up on the ground reader, but we haven't identified, and that the birds would still be too young to start breeding, the birds that we have released. But there are birds that are based at De Hoop. It's a huge project that BirdLife South Africa has been working on with the predator-proof fencing. They've got cameras that are monitoring. So there's a lot of hard work that's gone into it. And it is one of the things that we're working on through the African Penguin Biodiversity Management Plan. Then the looking after and hand rearing African penguin chicks. So we don't engage or interact with the birds besides its feed during feeding time and ensuring that and handling during health checks. We're very strict. We don't talk to the birds. We make sure that if we can socialize them with other chicks. So when they are at a big enough stage, we start crashing them together so that they know that they are a penguin. Penguins in the wild would also fledge without their parents, so they don't get taught to hunt by their parents. They get kicked out, and it's good luck, you're on your own. So again, that post-release monitoring is something that is incredibly important for us to prove that what we're doing is actually working. And it has shown that the birds that we release fare just as well as those in the wild. So that is why we continue to do the chick bolstering, because it is an effective tool that we are using.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you. Tracy and Ari have a joint question. It's the same idea. It's about you mentioned the increased ship traffic in and around Cape Town. Is there a significant amount? Have you seen the effect, and is there any data yet about how it's affecting the birds?
Yeah, there's work that's happening in Algoa Bay. That's obviously one of the big concerns for us is the vessel traffic and ship-to-ship bunkering. So there are papers that have been done to show the vessel noise does affect the birds underwater, and that's not just African penguins. It's the entire, it's all the marine life in that area. There was a paper that showed that when ship-to-ship bunkering stopped, when the moratorium was put on them in Algoa Bay, the numbers of African penguins at St. Croix increased. But when there has been ship-to-ship bunkering, those population numbers are crashing. So there has been a lot of work by a lot of universities, a lot of scientists to show that vessel traffic and there's the risk of obviously the oil pollution, but it's that noise pollution as well that we're worried about. And that is something that we are concerned about, and also concerned about now in Table View as well, and wanting to start working on that.
Okay. So I suppose it is something new, but there is work being done on it. So
yes,
again, it's great that we've got people that we're not going to be reacting to things, that there's actually proactive steps being taken. And then you can back that with data and information. It helps the fight.
So important. Yeah, it's incredibly important to have that, to have evidence to show that what we're doing or what needs to be done. Otherwise, no one's going to listen.
Fantastic. Romy, that's just to get some comments from the Q&A. Just a lot of people just expressing your thanks, their gratitude. Thank you for all the hard work, extending it to your team and to the people around, and just are very grateful that there are people like you and your other volunteers and the people in the organization doing this work. Thank you very much. You've given us all a call to action, and there are ways to get involved, and I encourage everybody to do that. If anybody would like to have any things, Romy has said she's happy to make herself available if there's any specific things. Again, thank you, Romy. Much appreciated for you spending your time with us. Thank you to everybody for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in a month's time for our next talk. Again, just a reminder about the books that are on special at Straight Nature, both online and at the Kirstenbosch bookshop. Thank you to Belinda behind the scenes. Romy, once again, thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye.